and championship weekend's upon us. It's the Hurry Up. I'm Albert Breer, and here to help us break down everything, championship weekend, coaching searches, all of that. On your left, we've got former Broncos, Bears, and Panthers head coach John Fox. On your right, we got former NFL receiver, former first-round pick, and former Tennessee Volunteer, Donte Stallworth. And we're going to get to the championship game, guys, but I want to start this week with probably the biggest news of the week. With all that's going on with the coaching searches, a bomb dropped on Monday. Sean Payton walked away from the New Orleans Saints after 15 seasons, 152 wins, 7 NFC South titles, a world championship. And that's without even getting to everything that he meant to the city of New Orleans post-Katrina. Both you guys know Sean Payton very well. Donte, you played for him for a brief time there in New Orleans. And Foxy, you were with him, in New York. You guys were coordinators together on a Super Bowl team, and you competed against him for a bunch of years in the NFC South. So I want to start with you. When you look at the totality of what Sean did over the last decade and a half in New Orleans, what sort of legacy do you think he leaves behind, both, on the city and then on football in general?
Well, but I think, looking back at it, post-Katrina, the city itself was upside down in dire need of some kind of a positive force. And, I look at it as a team. I'm not taking anything away from Sean, but, the fact that he and Drew Brees came into that city, a city needing, like I said, rejuvenation. And I think the Saints brought that to that entire city, economically, I think spiritually, everything. And then, you mentioned all the successes Sean had. And, again, I look back to it, I think a little bit a reason of this retirement is now all of a sudden Drew's not there. I'm not saying that's the only thing, but, what a great partnership they had, and, a lot of great wins, and, a lot of great accolades, well-deserved for sure.
And Donte, I want to get to the football part too, because I'd love to hear your perspective on what he did from a scheme perspective and how he might have changed the NFL game. But you were there through the Katrina season. I believe that last year in 2005, you guys played a lot of the year, maybe the whole year. Your games were in Baton Rouge. Jim Haslett, I think, was the coach, if I'm not mistaken there.
Yep.
And, and then, you come out of that, and obviously Drew gets there in March of that year, and two months earlier, Sean Payton arrives. So I just think maybe you could take people back to what it was like then, and kind of the role that the Saints played in helping the region sort of maybe restore some level of normalcy.
Yeah, we weren't even sure if we were going back to New Orleans during the 2005 season, when we were spending all of our time in San Antonio. That was our home base, and we were playing our home games in Baton Rouge, and we played a few home games in San Antonio as well. So after the conclusion of that season, I had shoulder surgery, and I was in Birmingham, and guess who's in there? Drew Brees is in there with me. He's doing his rehab on his shoulder as well. And, he and I would talk, obviously, quarterback, receiver, that's a natural thing where you're just going to have a conversation. I had, I think I'd met him before, but, we were just kind of there hanging out, doing our rehab. And he leans over to me one day and he says, "Hey, your boy reached out to me." And I'm thinking, who's my boy? And I gave him this look like, "Who are you talking about?" And he's like, "Sean Payton." And I'm like, "Oh, wait." I'm like, "You're thinking about coming to New Orleans?" And he was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Sean reached out to me." And he was like, Drew starts rattling off all my stats, all of everyone's stats, and asking me, "Hey, I seen this play against the Panthers when you were doing this and that. And, what was the concept on there?" And I'm like, "Dude, I don't even know. How do you know this?" But, but I bring that story up to say that relationship between Drew Brees and Sean Payton was a match made in heaven, because they were the same. They were two of the same person, two of the same analytic football minds. And so when you put those two together, and I remember when I first met Sean Payton, before I met Sean Payton, actually, Jason Witten, my former teammate in college who had played under Sean Payton in Dallas, had told me, "Man, you're going to love this offense. You're going to love Sean Payton. It's a wide receiver's dream." And when I first saw the playbook, I'm looking at it like, this looks like a Madden, like something someone drew up on Madden, like all these routes and all these guys doing, all these different concepts, things I had never seen before, again, outside of a video game. So I was excited to play in the offense. But just the beginning, when Sean got there, it was, I want to call it this, he had this swagger, this beautiful arrogance about him, that he understood exactly what he was stepping into, the challenge of coming into New Orleans, and trying to not only help rebuild the team but help rebuild the city, at the same time, simultaneously, which is a tough task to ask for anyone to do, especially after Hurricane Katrina and everything that the folks down in the Gulf Coast and New Orleans experienced. But Sean Payton was up for the task, and I remember one of the first, or I should say, one of the last meetings that I had with him. I was sitting in the room, and it was our third preseason game. And they traded me a couple of days later, but I'm sitting in the room before the team meeting. I'm going over the playbook because we were playing the Colts, I think, the next day or that night. And so I'm going over the playbook, and Sean comes and sits in there, and he's like on the phone, and he's like, "Hey," he's like, "I'm not bothering you, am I?" And I'm like, "I'm going to tell the head coach, yeah, you're bothering me. Get the hell out of here." But he asked me, and he sat down, and he's, very, very low on the phone. And then he starts to raise his voice, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to leave now. So then he looks at me and he's like, "No, I want you to stand here and listen to this." So I'm like, what is happening right now? And he's going off on somebody about the hotel that we were staying in. And he said, "I told you guys when I took this job, if you want us to be champions, you have to treat us like champions." And there were some expletives in there, mixed in. But when I walked out of there, that was when I realized, like, this dude is serious. Like, I don't know who he was talking to, but obviously he was talking to somebody who was pretty high up in the organization. And he basically, like, put his footprints on the organization, I believe, not just that day, but the first day he stepped into New Orleans. And that let me know, even though I was traded a couple of days later, that let me know that they were going to be successful. I didn't think they were going to be successful as they were right away, because I got traded to Philadelphia, and they beat us in the regular season. And then second round playoffs, they beat us again in New Orleans. And that was my first time in the playoffs. And I just remember thinking to myself, if I got to lose to a team, it would, this is the team. These are my guys. This is the city, everything they went through. But Sean Payton, even though we had a little rivalry for a little while during that season, I was sitting on the bench stunned because I thought we had a good chance to go to the Super Bowl that year, 2006 Eagles. And he comes all the way over to the bench after the game, to the Eagles bench. This is after the game. And he comes over and he gives me a hug, and he's like, "Hey, you played a hell of a game today." And I'm just kind of like, whatever, like, I lost or whatever. And then I saw him later on during the Super Bowl that year. I think it was in Miami. I think it was the Colts and the Bears. And I saw him at the Super Bowl, and he comes up to me and gives me this big hug, and he kisses me on the cheek, and I'm like, "Dude, what is wrong with you?" Like, we had our beef, right? And I just remember him coming up to me, and he was like, I was sweating because I had a pretty decent game. I had like an 80-yard touchdown or something there, and the game was really close, and we lost by a field goal. But he thought, I traded. This is what he's telling me. I traded this guy away, and he's going to come back and kick our ass and knock us out of the playoffs. And obviously, they ended up winning, and then they lost to the Bears that year, or that next game in the NFC Championship. But that moment between me and Sean it totally like squashed whatever beef we had, and he and I became pretty close over the years after that. Even though I never played under him again, but he would reach out to me when things weren't going so well on my end, and I would reach out to him, vice versa, and we became pretty close. And it was, even though I never played any actual games under him. That, to me, that's just a testament to the, not only to the coach that he is, but to the person that he is, the human being that he is.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, like, if I remember, there was a huge hit in that game, that Eagles Saints game too, like on Reggie Bush, maybe like in the flat, right?
Yeah,
So that's the one thing I remember about that game. I want to get back to one other thing you said though. You mentioned like how he said, like, you got to treat us like a championship team. And I think one thing that was like a tenet for Sean in New Orleans was he wanted his players to have the best, right? Like, so I always remember going there during training camp, and he'd pull me in and he'd say, like, "Hey, come look at these new like sleep pods we have for the players, or come look at this new meeting room we have for the players." He was really proud of it. Like, we want to make this a first class operation. Donte, I really think that started with his offense though, right? Like, so is there an easy way for you to explain how what you were looking at in 2006 was maybe a little different than anything that the NFL had seen before? Because of course, like, with Parcells and with Fossil, maybe you didn't see the full breadth of what his vision was. Like, what was so different about what he put in front of you in 2006?
Well, just for me, as being a receiver in the passing game, I mean, there were routes that were just, again, that I had only seen on Madden. And the previous offenses that I had played under, basically mostly West Coast offenses, And Sean had a kind of a West Coast, but it was like a West Coast spin, his own spin on it. But just the way that he isolated players and to beat players one-on-one, to isolate middle linebackers, to isolate safeties in coverage, and then the running schemes that he had, all these things, we put them in practice, and then or we would implement them in before practice, and then we put them in during practice, and just running these plays. It was, for me, like I said, like Jason Witten said, it was a dream come true to be a wide receiver in that offense. And as you see, they felt comfortable with trading me away to the Eagles when they had Marcus Colston. I think they picked him up in the 6th round, but Marcus went and had a great career under Sean Payton's offense. And so anybody, I think, who's played in that offense has the opportunity to be successful. And obviously it helps to have a quarterback like Drew Brees, but they put up the X's and O's between those two. And like I said, Sean Payton and Drew together, those two guys were really on the same page. And as play caller and quarterback, and when you can have that, where you have a quarterback who can basically make all the necessary throws, and have the brain and the wherewithal to read coverages, to switch plays at the line of scrimmage, to even call his own plays if need be. That was something that was pretty brand new to the NFL. Obviously, you had the Colts and Peyton Manning, who were just destroying teams that year as well. And really, before that year and the years leading after that. But I think what Sean Payton and Drew Brees were able to do was they were able to implement it. Sean Payton had Reggie Bush, he had Deuce McAllister, he had different backs, he had different wide receivers, and he was able to get all of those guys open. And I don't know if any coordinator had the ability to do that like Sean Payton did.
All right, so Foxy, you have to compete against that in the NFC South, like we talked about earlier. And you saw him when you were at the Panthers at the height. Like, you were there in 2009 with Carolina, when he had the Super Bowl team. What was so challenging about going against the Sean Payton team?
Well, kind of a little bit back, to what Donte said is, he always had a place for an X receiver, regardless of what name it was. Donte, start with him, and then, you go to Marcus Colston. Now he has Michael Thompson. So they had this unique set where it'd be the backside of trips with the X and the halfback. And so Sean's always had a really good halfback, even when we were back in New York. They had Thunder and Lightning. So he always had a very good receiving back. And I think that combination, when I think of a Sean Payton offense, that set, that side of the formation, not that he didn't do anything different, but especially on third down, that was something that you had to be prepared for, and trying to create mismatches. And sometimes the combination of that X, a really good X receiver, and that halfback, it's tough to cover. It's not your typical part of a formation. And I think he really has done a great job with that over time. And, and he gets the right players for it. And then Drew, like Donte said, Drew was a guy that could handle all that. I mean, he could make adjustments. He could motion a guy. They could have a guy outside and empty, bring that guy back down into the formation, and then, be a good zone man read. And, and then people just, they executed it so well, you couldn't stop it.
And you guys both know him well. So let's wrap it up here. Sometimes coaches walk away and they say, maybe we'll come back, and then they never do. I think Bill Cowher's a great example of it. John Gruden was that guy for a while, where guys walk away from the game and decide, hey, I like working 30 days a year on TV. I don't need to be spending 6 months of the year in a hole. And then there are other guys who, a year later, like, they have to get back in. If you had to guess right now, I'll ask both of you guys, and we'll start with you, Donte. If you had to guess right now, is he back in 2023?
I don't know. I think he's going to get a taste of the TV life this next upcoming season. And like you said, working 30, 45 days a year is much better than working 365 days a year. and the pay is not too shabby. So, I would love to see him back coaching. I actually meant to send him a text and ask him to stay one more year, because my opinion matters and it's so important. But, I would love to see him back, but I think he's going to get a taste of, being with his family, being able to take care of himself and get his health a little better. And, like I said, just going to do TV and it's not as stressful, but you can still have that same, you can still exert that same energy and that same knowledge and give it to the game and give it to the fans. I think he's going to enjoy it, and he'll stay there for a while.
Foxy, I was going to say you've been in this spot, but you really haven't, because, you went from one job to the next, right? Like, you went straight from Carolina to Denver and then Denver to Chicago, but you have had the chance now to know what it's like to be out. What do you think? Do you think Sean will be back in 23, 24, or do you think there's a good chance maybe he winds up going the Bill Cowher route?
I think that's up in the air. I really do. Kind of to Donte's point is, he may like the lifestyle way better, but I think he, I thought this year was very hard on Sean. I think it took its toll. As I used to tell players all the time, this game's only fun when you win. And the longer you do this, and like in Sean's case, those losses, they take something out of you. And, they had a bunch of injuries this year, no Drew for the first time. I think it was a realization that this stuff's hard. They're going to have some cap problems. They do have a quarterback issue. Jameis is hurt. You don't know. This is his second knee. You don't know how that's going to come. So I think it was good timing by Sean. I think he's going to get a taste. And it'll just be whether he can handle, life without the game every day. And the 30 to 60 days a year might not be enough for him. Who's to tell? But he definitely brought a lot to the game. He went out on his terms, right now, and what he decides to do, God bless him.
Yeah, and what's funny, Foxy, is I think a lot of times, and just having talked to guys over the years, not that I've been in one of these positions, but it does feel like guys maybe don't know until they actually get out. Like, they don't know if they're going to be the guy who just needs to get back in, or if they're going to be the guy that really enjoys it until they actually step away. And so I think that's probably why both of you guys are saying, I don't know, because Sean probably doesn't really know yet and probably won't know for a little while. Appreciate you guys coming out. On your left, that's former NFL head coach for the Panthers, the Broncos, and the Bears, John Fox. On your right, former NFL receiver, former first-round pick, and again, former Tennessee Volunteer. Got to get that in there for you, Donte Stallworth. When we see you next, we'll be getting ready for Super Bowl 56. Thanks for tuning in to The Hurry Up.